Everyone, welcome to Manufacturing Hub. Very excited to be back to continue our conversations in software and manufacturing. This is episode 171, and we are running a couple minutes late of real time because the back chat, the green room conversations about the book review and about all of the different cultures that we are talking about were just too good. And so, very excited to have Mark on. If you guys are new here, welcome. If you've been here before, welcome back. If you guys are new here, we do our very best to have, a fun conversation. We are an open and live show. So if you guys are watching, most of you are probably watching on LinkedIn and or YouTube. If you guys are watching, drop a comment, say hi, tell us where you're at. If there's some interesting comments that Mark has or Vlad or I, or you guys have questions, please feel free to go ahead and throw those in the chat. If everything on the software side is working correctly, we will see those and be able to pull them in. And if there are some super technical questions or other things, or we miss some of the comments, we will do our very best to get to them after the show. But without further ado, everyone officially welcome to Manufacturing Hub. My name is Dave. This guy up here is Vlad. This is episode 171 with Mark O'Donovan. Mark, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you so
Great
much
to
for
be here.
taking the time to chat with us today, Mark. I think it's going to be a very interesting conversation. That being said, before we get into the topic of manufacturing software and all of that, could you give us a bit of an introduction of your background? How did you get started in manufacturing? What was your career progression like? And ultimately, what you are doing today?
So I'm a system architect based out of Ireland, have my own single person consultancy, and I do a mixture of consulting and integration work. Integration tends to be proof of concept, very small stuff. It's only me. So how did I get into manufacturing? I graduated from college just when the dot-com bubble burst. I'd done microelectronics. And I got a job. Like my first, proper job was for a company doing electrical instrumentation and automation. So that was a lot of that was based around the dairy industry and energy. So I had a big job with a combined heat and power plant. And then for the next 10 years of my career, it was very focused on electrical engineering, high voltage, wind farms, transformers, switchgear, that sort of stuff, and very little automation. And I decided I really wanted to get back into automation because electrical it's less dynamic. A lot of the problems have been solved. They were solved in the 60s, 70s. So I looked at automation. I got back working for a company that I used to work for, and I had to, from 2014, relearn PLC programming, SCADA developing, and then starting to move into using databases of some description for MES functions. Work there. A lot of dairies, a lot of energy work still, a lot of wind farm work. I still do a lot of work with wind farms. And then I got a role as with a global brand of soft drink that everyone will know, and worked there as the lead automation subject matter expert for globally, and got really into the digital transformation side of it. And after a couple of years there, did a bit more freelancing work as a system architect, and then decided I'm setting up my own company because every digital transformation project has the same problems. Everyone makes the same mistakes. There's a list of 10 mistakes that people tend to make. And I said, well, if I can help people not make those mistakes, that'll be a fulfilling career. And that's kind of what I try to do now.
Awesome. I've got a couple of questions for you, Mark, right? But let's say going in maybe like the chronological order, starting with a power background, do you think, I guess for someone who's maybe choosing their field today, and I know this question comes up a lot, at least when I talk to, engineers who are still pursuing or finalizing their degree. What are your thoughts maybe on today's markets when it comes to going to power engineering versus automation versus maybe like embedded systems? Like any thoughts looking back on that?
Um, I think it depends on the personality, what you'd want to recommend. Um, you know, if you want to be part of, big projects, you're really making big things, project to project, there isn't a huge amount of rethinking. there are logistic problems. There's how to make it, but you're not coming. Every project isn't completely new, and it's a that's what the big engineering projects. That's what electrical will give you, and there's great career opportunities around renewables, in wind, in power transmission, all of that. But that's the type of person that it suits.
Mhm.
Um, and if you want to be somebody who you do a project and the next project might be completely different and you have to go learn something completely new, well, then I think certainly that's more in the digital transformation, industry 4.0. I'm doing a project now where I'm going to be doing a lot of programming in Python, like a tongue twister. So, and then I'll move on to another one, and I'm going to be programming PLCs.
Mhm.
And there's more jumping around. It's much more dynamic, and that doesn't suit everybody. Some people like to really take that and progress and bit by bit, and really sharpen that. So, you know, I think both of those are absolutely really ripe opportunities. For there's a load of opportunity in both of them. Excuse me. Um,
Yeah, and
what's the personality?
The reason why I ask, right, is because I graduated with a degree. I guess I specialized in power and renewable energy systems. And
Okay.
I remember in my early days, I was even, reviewing formulas on drives and how to align like solar panels when I was applying to
Yeah, yeah.
jobs at the very like early stage. And to be honest with you, like I got lucky because I think my personality suits automation a lot better because I like the variety. And I also, to the comment that you made, I think that power, there's a lot more like field engineering type of work, right? Where the problems have been solved in a general sense, right? But you're more like scaling and deploying systems rather than maybe doing a lot of design or programming. So
Yeah.
I've heard similar feedback, but I've
And
not worked in power myself. So
I think a good sort of example is even when I started, which was, uh 2001, 2002, but certainly you'd look in a plant and you'd find the hand-done calculations for the short circuit contribution, or which when you're designing your power connection at a plant, be it a manufacturing plant or anything else, that's one of your key calculations. And that was a difficult calculation. You've got to be careful. You've got to be able to follow through. Now you
mhm,
put the parameters into software and it comes out.
yeah.
So the that's changed things a little bit. So, but I
I
think
look, I
that
still remember the Smith charts and all kinds of, the
yeah.
degree
Uh,
specific paperwork that we had to do. But anyways, it was an interesting class for sure. Power. Let me ask you, I guess, like moving forward a little bit, right? So you mentioned digital transformation, and to be honest with you, like I think that depending on the groups that I talk to, they define it anywhere from taking a very basic, let's say, paper process, and we're just going to put it on an Excel spreadsheet, versus we're going to audit the entire facility and we're going to siphon out data, figure out what hardware we need, what software we need, maybe. So, when you were part of that digital transformation team or initiative, what was I want to say, the ambience like, or what was the approach like, even to digital transformation?
so the digital transformation was serving a need, and there was certainly a need where the ERP and manufacturing were disjointed. There wasn't an information flow, or a robust information flow. There was some, and that was certainly there. There was also, I suppose, a corporate, perhaps box ticking exercise to have a digital transformation project. And I think today you might have, that same need for have an AI project. I want AI. Um,
Mhm.
so so there was that need, but there was also that overarching. So it was a very big project. It was very high profile. Everything was being done at once, and the I think the problem with that was that there was no room for learning, for making mistakes, for trying out different options, and for that to work, for that approach to work, you either have to have some people on the client team who have done a number of them, or you have to have a system integrator or a software company that is able to guide you and lead you and have that very trusting relationship. Um, and I think in that particular project that I was working on, we had neither. So as the site team, we really needed that guidance from people who have done this 10 times, 20 times, who say, yeah, well, look, we did this in another project, or oh, I wouldn't do it that way. But the integrator was really looking for the direction from us as well. Whereas if we had had a smaller, you know, gone with a programmed approach, an agile approach perhaps, but that we could have done something, got some learnings, moved on, got that learnings. So, you know, that was one of the things that, like really made it very tough on that project, because it was 2 years to get to a point where you're starting to add value. We did everything from specing hardware, a lot of figuring out what the existing PLC code base was. You're looking at a PLC that was written 20 years ago. The guy who, there wasn't as much ability to comment on software. So a lot of reverse engineering, a lot of figuring out. You're looking at 5 machines which are kind of similar but all different, because they were done every 3 years. A new machine was done, and so there was a lot of struggles with it. And I think one of my big takeaways on it is, take it slow. But to me, digital transformation, as I said, it can be that sort of buzzword. But
Mhm.
if you strip back, I think it really describes what has to be a natural process anyway. Companies have gone from being less digital to more digital. We did it with email, and we replaced faxes. And no one said we've a digital transformation project. But if any of us had been responsible for bringing email into a company with 500 people and setting up 500 email addresses and training people how to use email, people who weren't already using email, that was a really challenging thing, I'm sure.
Yeah.
You have somebody who only ever typed on a typewriter, and you're now trying to get them to use a computer to send email. So I'm I've been toying around with something in my head, and I'm trying to get right of how to launch as a sort of I don't know, say LinkedIn set of posts or something. But people often say, well, what's the most important thing about digital transformation? And some people will talk about the people and the process and technology, and that often comes up. And other people talk about having a digital strategy. And I think I've come to the conclusion that if you have a culture of innovation, and by that I mean that people can try things and fail, and they can try this new digital approach and fail. Your culture will eat strategy for breakfast, and you will digitally transform without even trying, without having this digital transformation initiative. So that, I think, has been the realization that I've had, doing this now for quite some time, that if you can get your culture to be an innovative one, where you support innovation, and by that I really mean you give people the space to try something and tweak it or rubbish it. um you'll be transformed before you kind of before you know it, as
Mhm.
opposed to having, this is the digital transformation initiative, this is what we're going to do, and when we're finished, we're done. It
Right.
doesn't work that way, unfortunately.
Let me ask a follow up, and maybe it's a question for both of you because I think it would be good to get Dave's perspective on this as well. But the thought that I've been having, around digital transformation is, or I guess like who's the best person to lead what initiatives make sense? Because I think, in my mind, if you've, or at least like what I've seen from my experience, is if you come from a facility that's been very highly automated and then you're put in an environment that's a lot less automated, you can then easily sort of like translate some of those learnings into that facility, right? But it's a little bit more difficult if you're, let's say, asking someone who's been, let's say, for 30 plus years at that facility, what do you think we should be digitizing or changing? So I'm almost, and again, that person could be someone from outside, it could be a consultant, it could be a systems integrator, it could be someone from a sister facility within the same company. But you know what I mean, like I'm just not sure that the facility itself can kind of like pick itself up at the like click of a button and sort of start changing within itself. So I'm curious, maybe if you guys have thoughts on that side as well, because I think that's relevant to what you're saying, Mark.
Good. Dave, you can go first. I've been hogging the
Oh, thank you.
conversation a bit.
I was going to say, Mark, the kind of reoccurring joke is that I get to say that at the beginning, I get to welcome the guests on, and then mentally, I've got like a 10 to 15 minute countdown before my next opportunity to come on. So thank you for that. And I think it's a really good question, and to a large extent, I would agree with Vlad that it's really difficult to go and take decades of internal experience if we've always done it this way and know immediately what you need to do in order to be successful. But I would say that the most successful organizations that I have seen that have gone through some transformational project are organizations who are able to go look and have that drive internally. Now, maybe you have the drive internally and you bring some new people on and you empower them to go through whatever this transformational phase is to go have that drive to go make these changes as needed. It may be that there is some sort of executive leadership group that says, hey, we need to do this, let's go pay some people to go help us figure out where the lowest hanging fruit is. But in my experience, and I say this coming from the person who has tried to force outside organizations to make changes because I can see all of this great opportunity in the past, unless you have buy-in at the very top of the organization, at the people who are willing to go write the checks in order to go do the job, then it's very difficult to go fight against the current or to go push the rope, if you will, of let's force this organization to change so that they can do the things that I know will help make them better. When in many cases and many instances, they're just happy to continue to run at the 30% or at the 50% that they're currently running and have the same output because it's worked for the last 30 years. And there's lots of feelings that it'll work for the next 30 years.
Yeah, I think I don't disagree with anything you said. I might add a little bit in that, certainly you cannot change a company that isn't ready to change. A bit like, giving up smoking. I think they say it doesn't matter what you do until you're ready to give up, it won't work.
Mm-hmm.
But I think you certainly need to have that executive buy-in. You need
Mm-hmm.
that to come. You need somebody who has a really good understanding of how the company works. That's,
Mm-hmm.
somebody from a plant floor point of view. And you need somebody who can bring a vision of what's possible. And it's very rare you're going to have somebody who has all of that. Or if you take somebody who has great operational knowledge, they need a year to really figure out what's possible. At least a year before you even start. So I think that's where bringing in some outside assistance can be really beneficial. You've got the vision coming from that leadership where they want to, as they understand the benefits. You've got somebody who, again, is really passionate about changing it, who understands how the business works. And then you bring in somebody who can say, well, here's all the other way, here's what other people have done. Here's, some approaches. Here's what people are really talking about. Here's what people have found doesn't work. That's a bit what I try to do. So I'm trying not to just to say it. I'm not saying it because that's what I do. I do it because that's what I believe really can add some value. To say, look, here's where they are. Even if it's a bit like a personal trainer. Some said, like, why do I need a personal trainer? I know what exercises I need to do. I know what I should be eating. I know how much I should be eating. But some new ideas, somebody who can give you that bit of accountability. That's why you look at getting somebody in. So in the same way, you want somebody who can give you give you some options of different ways to do it, and help you with ordering, because I think that's a real challenge that companies can have, especially if they try and do it themselves. They can look at these 20 things they want to do, and it's okay. Well, it's a bit like, how do I tackle that? That's a huge mess. What's the right order? What order will make what's easy to do at the start that will make the next step easier? Because and it's certainly digital transformation. It's a bit of an eat the elephant. It's you know, it's one bite at a time, but you've got to know how to cut it up, how to get there. So, yeah, I think they're the characteristics you need, and you can get them from different people.
Absolutely. I would agree with that. And let me ask Mark. I know that you've talked about kind of the need and the internal need for people to want to change and for organizations to want to change and to support that. One of our conversations before coming live was just the speed in which software has changed, right? The speed in which software from 10 years ago to today, and then maybe even in the last couple of years, I feel like it's ramped up even more. And what we think is going to change, for the next 10 years into the future. Can you tell us a little bit about what you've experienced and maybe tell us if you think that's helping organizations transform and change? Are we creating the right types of software in the environments in order to help organizations go through this process to transform?
Yeah. So, like, if you look, say, 20 years ago or even 10 years ago, if we were talking about manufacturing, we were talking about PLC programming, SCADA,
Mhm,
maybe MES, but about 30% of companies have an MES, and it was less then. Um,
mhm,
so you were really talking about an environment dominated by three or four players, really.
mhm,
Rockwell, Siemens, Wonderware. They were certainly, in Ireland, they dominated. Small bit of Mitsubishi. In America, I think it was Rockwell dominated, and then there was some others. Automation Direct certainly had some things, but and that was high cost of entry, a lot of license costs. So very hard to go and do something, to try something out if I had to get 3 or 4 thousand for a license for another SCADA client. You know, um,
mhm,
that's those sort of barriers were there. I think the the maybe from 10 years, let's say 15 years ago to 10 years ago, you saw a change where stuff became much better to use. I think Tier Portal really, that whole Siemens, they integrated it so you have one platform that you can do things, and it certainly made things easier. Um, Stuff became much more user friendly. A lot of that stuff, which really helped. And then 5 years ago, licensing models started change, and I think
mhm,
Ignition really were the catalyst for doing this. The cost base became completely different. The
mhm,
cost of license, the cost of a SCADA, the idea of unlimited tags, unlimited clients. That was the change. Especially with the software that can do everything that the software that costs 10 times as much can do. Um, but we still were talking about very much, you know, software that you were unlikely to learn generally. Specific software for specific cases. Um, And then, the last 5 or 6 years, I think there's been a change to, you know, the architecture has changed. We may talk about the unified namespace, but the
mhm,
idea of using general purpose IT tools, 5 years ago, if you told, as I say this all the time, 5 years ago, if you told me I would be using, MQTT and Node-RED to solve problems. You know, I've gone, what are you talking about? No, not in manufacturing. We have to have our PLC, and we want to do it in this way. And um, so I think PLCs have become much more powerful. I love the new, what I call a smart PLC, where you have your embedded Linux and your PLC on the same piece of hardware. Um, I think that really opens up the possibilities. It may be that we'll see SCADA as a software by itself disappear. Um, you know, um, there's so many other solutions. So if you were an automation engineer 10 years ago, you used SCADA to solve all your problems. It was doing your data operations. It was doing your visualization. It probably possibly was doing your historian. So it was your data store. Um, you know, I certainly have in my time put a lot of MES functionality built on a SCADA platform. I had OEE, I had downtime tracking, I had recipe management. I see all of those functions are starting to be what I call federated, which might be the wrong term, but that I can have smaller modules to control my recipes, and I can have a completely different something from a completely different supplier to run my OE and my alarming. And I don't need to have this big monolith anymore. And because of that, it tends to be software that is, I suppose, more from a C plus space. So, be it Node-RED, be it Python, well, I'm going to say Visual Basic, perhaps not, but that sort of structured language, as opposed to a platform where most of it, if you take a SCADA, yes, I can have scripting, but that's not where the power is coming from. It comes from the machine itself. So, certainly where you're taking information and you want to display it or store it, I see that becoming general IT tools, as I was, call them. And so you'll see that kind of that you'll get smaller software, I think more bespoke software, and the real sort of challenge over the next 5 years will be something that can, hold them. I don't want to say contain them, because now we're talking containers, when and that's another big change. I think that'll be the big change. But I think before we talk about containerization, it's how do I orchestrate all of my softwares and make them talk to each other. So
And
that's
orchestrate containers.
well, it may be that it may be done through orchestrating containers. I'm not as knowledgeable as I should be in containers. I'm still learning, but I would say if you are somebody working in manufacturing and you're working in the OT and you're using VMs. 10 years ago, you switched from probably having dedicated servers or dedicated SCADA PCs down on the plant floor to virtual machines. So you did that 10 years ago. The clock is now starting on the move from VMs to containers. The leaders have moved, and now we're in the ramp up phase. So that's kind of one of the pieces of advice I'd give to somebody who's working. Yeah, get your head around containers.
I really like the perspective, Mark. I think, look, one thing that I'm constantly like frustrated with is the whole SCADA MES ERP, because I've
Hmm.
also noticed the lines are quite blurry, and again, you can call something a SCADA that now has like ERP components, MES components, and it's, how to say it, it's not that easy to define, especially for new engineers, right? Like they don't want to be that involved on the business side, so they're just building out an application. They need to ingest data, and so in conversations across teams, they can be called very different things. Where at some point there were, I want to say, like barriers between the three, but now
Yeah,
the lines are blurry. So maybe there's an opportunity to figure out like a different
yeah.
nomenclature. So
But to be very maybe early 2000s, I think the paradigm shift that is happening at the moment is we had a stack that was, and our Purdue model was based on software levels, our
right.
SCADA,
Yep.
our MES, that stack is dead. And if you want a stack, it's functionality. What is MES functionality? What is SCADA functionality? What is ERP functionality? And then where it lives becomes less important, because certainly you have a lot of ERP systems that can do MES functionality. You can certainly do MES functionality in a SCADA. You can certainly do SCADA functionality on a HMI. And you can do it all on an industrial PC sitting on a on your backplane with different software running. So I think that is the when we look back in 20 years, I think that will be a big paradigm shift that we'll have say happened, is that, yeah, it became less about the stack and or a software stack, and more about this is the functionality stack.
Mhm.
And so if I was talking to people who are starting on their career, that would be something I'd really be, think, focus on the function it's doing and who does it help. And if it helps a plant manager or a team lead or, the line manager, it's MES. That's why it's about recipe management and it's about OE and those are the functionalities. If it helps the schedulers and it helps the finance guys, it's ERP. And if it's the operators use it and the guys in the plant floor, it's a SCADA function.
I will, Mark, if I can put maybe like an asterisk before I let Dave jump in, just because you can do it doesn't always mean you should, right? Because I agree with you. I can, as a PLC programmer, I can create ladder logic that would do recipe management
Yeah,
and create all kinds of fancy, let's say, logic and display that on an HMI, but doesn't necessarily mean that's the right approach. So use the right tool maybe to build the
yeah,
right infrastructure. So I just want to make that as a caution, maybe for some of
yeah.
the
No,
newer or younger
I didn't
listeners.
mean to suggest that, but I suppose as you take your new IoT device,
Mhm.
and that can be doing any of that functionality, I don't think people should really worry. Is this an MES software? Is this a
Right.
it's a function and it's solving your problem.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Right.
Dave?
Interesting. I think they're interesting comments, Mark. I'm not sure how I feel about maybe redefining where and how we use those. I like the intent. I think on a learning intent, it would make sense. I feel like we now have nearly every software package that takes bits and pieces of all of those, from plant floor to operations to finance to procurement to inventory, and it's very much intermixed, right? I feel like we've come to the point of it is probably harder to delineate what is at which level than it has ever been before. And in fact, I've had lots of conversations with kind of younger organizations that say, hey, who should have responsibility for SCADA, right? We've got controls folks who are very much process controls folks, and while they want to be processed, they don't really want to touch anything above a PLC, right? So do the controls people own the SCADA, or is that more kind of like OT engineering side of folks that would own the SCADA? And then where does cybersecurity come in, right? So whose responsibility is it to make sure that our facilities are secure regardless of where we put it? And so I think it is an interesting conversation. I actually want to go and maybe ask the question of, do you think in the near term or maybe the long term we're still going to have all of those different layers, right? And I think you said something to the effect of, you think the Purdue model is generally going away. So do you think we'll still have the SCADA system that is SCADA and the MES that intersects between SCADA and ERP, or do you imagine that we're going to see larger systems come in and everything kind of transitions into one of those larger systems?
I mean, I think with a lot of uncertainty, because we really
Hmm.
don't know. We could be at peak fragmentation. I think I think we'll always see a delineation between ERP and everything else, and that's for
Okay.
reporting. And Sarbanes-Oxley and other legislation will drive that. So I think that will be the delineation that's safest. Um, what happens below? I would be most worried about the SCADA.
Hmm.
Um, I think because I think the IoT device is taking a lot of that functionality away. And it's doing it better, and it's doing that data contextualization and data normalization and getting data where it needs to go really, really well. And we were using SCADA for that, and doing it in SCADA can be clunky and hard. Um, so it's SCADA I would be most worried about. I think even within that, though, I would really differentiate between what I would call, I suppose, open single directional communications, where I'm pulling information from the plant floor and I'm going to be, storing it for my AI or my machine learning or for my dashboards, and what I would call closed loop control, where, that's where SCADA, that's where we have deterministic communications. I've pressed the button on the SCADA. I need it to happen in a very timely, controlled manner on the plant floor. That I've pressed start. I need something to actuate. I've pressed stop. I need it to stop. That is so. It could be that that's a split. That we see, the we look at, and it could be that, to touch a bit on what you said, the controls folks are looking after that closed loop control system, and it's more IT or even the OT engineers who are looking after that pipeline that's going from the edge up to your central data store for future use. So that's the best bit that that's how I see it going. But I would say I'm about 40% confident that that's how it'll go. But I would be most worried about I'd be most worried about SCADA. PLCs, I think we're still. I don't think there's anything that does machine control better than a PLC. I'm not a fan of PC-based control. So, and I don't include Beckhoff PCs because they're designed for machine control. I mean, really, so I think that's certainly where I see it going. And I think that's the split that's coming, and you will have some people who are controls who will stick in that closed loop world. You'll have a SCADA, but that SCADA might be really almost just doing HMI functionality. And the dashboards that we used to make on our SCADA, we're doing on Grafana now, and they're pulling from an MQC broker or a SQL database or something else. And that's being done by the IT team, who have taken the edge information, and they've done an ETL, or they've done some whatever process they really want to go with. So that's I think the split. And I think at the moment you have people trying to do it all, and sometimes falling between two stools, but they're very different, because it's a very there's a huge opening of tools for one side. There isn't really on the other, bar perhaps that idea where you have your Linux machine embedded in your PLC, but that's really designed to facilitate getting the data out of there and ready for IT people to use. To me,
If I can jump in on that, and I completely agree with what you're saying, Mark. I think that the question is also, for new facilities, right? Because older facilities that, let's say, don't have an MES or ERP currently, obviously they're going to continue working, let's call it, into the future. If they decide not to install them, the SCADA system will exist, right? But
yeah,
Dave, like, my question for you would be, would you ever in a new facility install a software package that is now only a SCADA and doesn't provide any data functionality, right? And to me, that answer is almost always no. And by that same logic, that one package would probably run on the same server. So it would be very difficult to even delineate what is SCADA, what is MES, because it's kind of one, architecture, one server. It could be obviously like multiple servers in reality, but it's one sort of like contained system that not only controls the lines and the PLCs and whatnot, but also provides data to the, to the layers above. So I would agree with Mark that kind of like bundles all of that in for a new facility, but it will obviously exist as a nomenclature for anything that's legacy. What do you think?
I guess I think that the MES layer is, outside of the legacy facilities, is one of those things that could be bundled into what we call SCADA, right? It's SCADA plus some reporting and some trending. Or it could be bundled into SCADA plus a business intelligence tool like a Power BI or a Tableau for that reporting and trending. Or I've seen lots of ERPs have MES modules, right? So I think the MES is one of those. It gets pulled in all sorts of directions. And I have worked with groups that are very much like process historian specific groups. And as they go look a lot of the work that they do and are pulling from time series process historians is very similar to lots of work that I see done in the MES space. And so for me, it is less of a we have to have a layer that we call MES, and these are the 5 or 10 things that it does. And it's more my goal is always to go help educate and facilitate end users collecting the data and then doing something with the data so that they can go make decisions. And I feel like it's less important that they go through the process of building a standalone MES so that everyone has an additional login so that we can go find information there, and more allow people to go have the information. My strong preference is to go allow people to have the information in the area and using the tools that they are familiar and comfortable with, and that is what I found is important, is giving people that information. As to if we will continue to see kind of the same stacks of pieces of software, probably not. I feel like the lines blur more and more every passing month and every passing year from what are the particular layers, where are we getting the information. For new viewers, Vlad and I, we on Manufacturing Hub did IIoT last month as our theme, and it was a lot of how and what and why, and it gives us a bunch of information to go find and pull new sensors and new information into, yeah, to find new sensors and new information that historically we wouldn't be able to. And at some point it needs to go somewhere, and hopefully you own that somewhere. But beyond the hopefully you own that somewhere and that data and understand the calculations, it just becomes a this is what and how we go through the process of doing things. So I would say that I feel like it's less important as to kind of having those specific layers as opposed to we are going through the process and collecting and understanding what's going on with that data and that information.
But I think Vlad and Dave, I think I'm saying the same thing as you hear. But when you're looking at a greenfield site, and most of the work that's done in manufacturing is unfortunately not on a greenfield site,
Hmm.
but 10 years ago, you would have said, okay, I'm going to put in a SCADA, and now I have
Hmm.
my SCADA, I can have this functionality that solves these problems. Now, when you take a greenfield site, you could say, here are the problems I want to solve. So here's the functionality I need to bring. So here are the software packages I can use to solve it. And it could be that we won't have an MES and we'll have a SCADA and an ERP that can do those, and all of my functionality has been done. Or it could be that the IoT side will drive a certain portion of it, and I don't need some functionality to be in my SCADA. So I can make a different product selection for my SCADA. I can have a more performant or less performant one. But I think you can now look at it from here are the problems I want to solve. And there are so many solutions out there that you can then, you know, have very different software selection choices, and their functionality Venn diagrams will overlap in different ways, and you can get the best thing, as opposed to saying, well, here's what I'm limited by, my software, so here's what I have to do.
Let me ask again, and maybe it is a question for both of you, but the next bullet point, right? And so, again, maybe to take a step back, I've always worked in very large manufacturers, and I guess the way I've been taught is it's almost everyone's bought in on the principle of acquiring data that is beyond just process data, which is typically what you'd find at the SCADA level, right? So there is a need to synthesize a little bit more than just sensor values or temperature or level values that you would, let's say, trend at the SCADA layer into MES or ERP. Do you, Mark, see your clients or your customers not always be bought into the premise that there needs to be data that goes beyond that? And I guess, like, I'm curious on your perspective as to maybe why, or are they being more bought into the future? What does that look like?
I think I do a very good job of selling to them why they need to be.
Okay.
I'd be very much on, you know, as you as you move your data, you can, I don't want to say through the stack, but as you move it through the stack, you can add context. So now you can take that temperature setting, which was a trended value, and look at it through the lens of what orders are going on at that time. Because you've added in your information, you can add in what values have been changed from the recipe. So you add context, and I think it's that additive context which really drives additional value, and that's the value that someone's trying to unlock out of digital transformation. You have an energy meter, and it's been sitting there for 20, 30 years. But if we can pull it into the same data infrastructure as we know the recipe and the batch that is on the line, and we know the speed the line is going at, we can now start to look at, well, this is how energy is being used within this batch. This is the amount of energy it costs to make that part, and we can really, start to drive value that we didn't even think was possible 10 years ago, perhaps. The idea that when a car, works better with large things than small things, but when a car goes off the end of an assembly line, you can know the total cost. You can know how much electricity was used for that car, as opposed to, well, I know how much the plant used in the last month, and I know I made 10,000 cars, so we'll divide it. So to get that real data in real time, I think. So I sell that quite hard. And I think if people aren't interested in that, then they're not really looking for somebody to help them with a digital transformation plan and program. So it's there's someone who doesn't want to be helped. In that situation, I think it's the company Dave mentioned earlier that think they're fine, and again, if they you can only help so much, and you can try and give them ideas, but if they're not going to bite, say thanks for the time. We'll talk to you some other time.
Dave?
Absolutely. Let me ask. Let me ask the question, Mark. So I've traded a couple of messages with Brian in the chat, and Brian is saying how software is such a big deal these days. And then we were talking about how the skill sets for controls engineers need to change. And so I'm going to go ahead and to go ahead and pop up a couple of comments for the folks watching live. Brian is saying that he agrees, and controls engineers will need to have a blended skill set with software engineers. And I was telling Brian how I've seen, the transition from controls engineers to more of like an OT engineer with a position and skill set with some more programming knowledge, some more networking knowledge. What are you seeing? What are you seeing? What sort of skill sets do you think will need folks either on the plant floor or plant floor tangential to keep up with all these changes in software?
So, I mean, I sometimes refer to my father's control engineer. Now, my father was an accountant, so, but traditionally, when controls engineer, it was ladder logic, or perhaps instruction list programming. It was serial communications. It was a lot of multimeters. There was no switches. I mean, I think sometimes that's the image people still have, and I don't think those control engineers. I mean, they're either retiring very soon, or they have retired. Now, if I met somebody who was a controls engineer and that was their viewpoint and they were in their 20s, I'd be saying, no, you need to understand networking. You need to be able to design a network where you can say, here are my VLANs, here's the IP addresses I want to do, route communications between them. You don't have to be the network expert. There's other people for that. But in the room with them, you need to be able to talk about that. You need to understand a certain amount of cybersecurity. You need to understand about zones of control and pipes between them, and what a firewall does, and But again, I think in a good, mature organization, the cybersecurity people should be telling you how to do things safely, not telling you things you can't do. And I think that's sometimes not always there. So absolutely, you'd need to understand, SQL databases, queries. That's something get the complete idiot's guide to SQL, and that level, that that
Hmm.
well. You're able to write small queries. You're able to understand when you read someone else's query what it's doing. But even that information, I'd say, might be kind of 5 years old. I think most, again, the younger controls engineer, they'll have been exposed to C programming or Java or something in their college courses, or in something else. So I don't think that's a huge problem. Even a SCADA scripting language, if it's Ignition and it's Json, they're close enough. You can read Python code, you can read Node-RED, and roughly understand what's happening. Sorry, not really. But you do need to start understanding about APIs. I think is something that a controls engineer in the last few years would want to start understanding. You certainly, if you haven't been looking at MQTT, would want to be looking at it very quickly. And understanding you know the move away from point to point to hub and spoke architecture. So I think there is a lot of things there. You know, you should get familiar with Linux. That was something I had to do over the last 2 years, and me and ChatGPT. I have a Raspberry Pi. That's as much as I know. I want to set up with Linux now, and now I'm pretty comfortable. I'm using Portainer to create my containers, and I have my containerized Node-RED, and I have my containerized Mosquito running on my Linux machines, and I mean, so no, and I don't think I'm a particularly bleeding edge OT engineer. Maybe a little bit behind that. I'm not at the back. So there's a those are the things that I think if you haven't done the networking and the VLANs and the SQL, okay, get those really quickly. They are bread and butter for a controls engineer today, really. Now, there is a role, I think, still in plants, on a plant floor, where you have an electrician who also does PLC programming. I think that I'm not saying they need to go out and learn SQL and things like that today. But if you're not doing wiring, if you're not allowed to pull out a screwdriver in the plant, if you're at that level, then absolutely you need to be moving up. You need to have understand that programming language. You need to understand databases. You need to understand networking, and you need to be moving into you know the different types of APIs, how to do an API. You need to get your head around Linux, and you need to get your head probably around, I think, pub sub architectures and the move away from point to point. I think we didn't mention that, but that's actually, I suppose, a huge undercurrent perhaps in the manufacturing industry, because point to point and the amount of integration and the way it scales as you scale up your number of nodes. It's I have one node, so I've what, two nodes is one connection, three nodes is two, four. When you get to 30, it's silly numbers. And I think that shift really is out of everything we've said, that's the one thing that I am sure we're not going back on.
I really
Is
like
the
that
move away from
list and
point.
overview, Mark. I will say once again, a little bit jokingly on your last point with the screwdriver, I would say, just because you can doesn't mean that's the most cost effective thing you should be doing. So I think the
Yeah,
advice, for younger engineers is you can certainly go in many directions in controls, but ultimately, I think if you want to progress in your career, if you want to be, like useful to the organization, if you learn the skills you've just mentioned, I think
yeah,
that's where the value lies, right? I think that's
yeah.
but yeah,
And
really good list. Mhm.
there's a new role coming, and I think the old role of the controls engineer who's on the concrete side of the business, the plant floor, is still going to be there. And that's a great role. And there are people who it is essential and needed, and there are people who will love that. But there's a new role needed where you've got to be able to straddle the two. You've got to be comfortable out on the plant floor. You've got to be able to talk to the engine, those electrical technicians, and understand about a 420 milliamp signal, and those sort of things, as well.
Let me ask you, I guess, on that side because that's a good point. So I've spoken to actually several organizations, some of which try to bring someone from the OT side into the software space, and I think you need someone who really wants to do that. And then I also know a very large organization that's trying the opposite, meaning that they have sort of like IT managers, IT, software engineers that they're now trying to upskill on the OT side in hopes that they now become this sort of like bridge between the plant floor. But obviously they have a lot less, like, let's say, PLC and SCADA understanding. They're just trying to learn by like, I guess, like bridging the gap in order to become that role. So I guess, do you have any thoughts on who the ideal candidate for that position would be?
I mean, I think it can be either. Um, I think the if you have somebody who's coming from an IT background, and I would split when I talk about IT into what I call production supporting IT. And these are IT guys who, look after the servers that run your production, who look after your ERP, and you have an IT that services the business, your email, your Zoom
Mhm.
meetings, etc.
Sure.
Um, and your production IT team are very well positioned to move into that OT space, or certainly down into it. I think the real mindset shift is to understand that what's coming out the bottom of the plant that's going into the trucks at the end, that's driving everything. I used to have that conversation, that black liquid that's going out the bottom of those plant doors is paying for everything. If we are driving, if so, and that really comes down to production stoppages and understanding the impact. I often say the difference between IT and OT. Your OT, if you've sat down with a laptop on a pallet to try and fix a machine with the plant manager standing over you asking when will it be done. It's IT if a ticket comes into you, and 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 that's where the biggest disconnect is. I often, talk to people about how you can't use your IT service management system for your OT service management system. Now, we
Mhm.
don't have many OT service management systems in place, and it's done on a completely ad hoc basis. So we do need to have something that is more robust, and we need to take learnings from an ITSM, but we have to be responsive to that production's need to be able to, throw resources at something when production is down. Um, so, um, but then again, if you have somebody who is interested, and I think if you have somebody who's in the control space, if they're willing to learn SQL, yeah, they'll be willing to learn more and to go up. That might be a good sort of maybe acid test going after. Okay. They've
I like
taken the
that as a
SQL.
test. Yes, because I
Yeah,
guess SQL is like a very different, like, it's not a programming language you see. Usually you don't have many database courses. So if they're willing to go through that, then yes, maybe they
yeah,
should be in that position.
yeah,
I like that. Um,
yeah. Or
I
if you
know
find a
we're
controls engineer understands the SQL queries that are written somewhere that are in the SCADA perhaps, go, yeah, okay, they're your guy. They're going to be the bridge. Um, but I think it's more about people and mindset and organization than the skills. The skills, um,
good.
skills
I
are common.
I I know we're already over the hour. I do want to be respectful of Mark's and everyone's time, but I do want to maybe hit very quickly the last but not least important topic, which is, being discussed all over the place, which is AI. I think we had like a brief conversation about it. I would want to get your maybe thoughts on it, Mark. And to set the premise, I guess my understanding of AI, and I've certainly read a lot of articles on it. I think that there's sort of AI that processes maybe numerical data, right? So aggregating information from flow meters, from batches, temperatures, and whatnot, and is able to maybe spit out areas of improvement or areas that there might be deficiencies, versus there's generative AI or ChatGPT, or these like chatbots that aggregate more sort of like language or written text that can now predict better, or I guess can be queried and be used in use cases like, I don't know, looking at manuals, for example, a little bit easier. So I'm curious, maybe as an overarching question, what do you see as opportunities in terms of AI today, and maybe potential like use cases even that could be applied in the near future?
So I'm very skeptical when people talk about AI, and I think I mentioned earlier that I think it's, oh, I want AI. What have you got that has AI? Where I see, so I would always say to someone is, if you want AI, what problems do you want AI to solve? I know I worked with one customer and they took all of their specifications, they put them into a language model, and that allowed suppliers query the LLM that they created and say, what type of panels are allowed, and it would say this specification on this page says these are the panels that are allowable. So there's certainly that sort of specify or specific LLM that you can have, um, that does give some value, that does solve some problems. So I think you can certainly leverage it in the same way. There is certainly better chatbots, which means you don't have to have a first line person, and I think we can use that in manufacturing. But the manufacturing specific ones, where if you break out of AI some of the functions, vision systems is a form of AI, and they're getting better. Object recognition, object counting. That there are a lot of, if you have products that are difficult to count using photo cells or something else. I know of an example where people had a bakery and they have buns coming out, and the buns are in, not in a very, hard scan. That they use a vision software for object recognition that does the counting, and they trained a model to do that. I think you have the predictive maintenance, which is use case, which is almost so well understood, people don't think of it as AI anymore. Um, but I think there's a lot of opportunities in the machine learning space. That's where I would really see. Um, there's a project that I'm doing at the moment where at the moment we're taking the wind forecast in from an API and using that to calculate the power output of a wind farm. With some parameters. What we want to do next is to take that information, use a machine learning algorithm to get us a better prediction model. That might take into account much more factors than we can make in my Python script that's doing the modeling at the moment. That will spot patterns, perhaps about when the wind direction is from somewhere, some turbines produce less than we'd expect because there's some trees blocking it that our model is never going to go. But the machine learning will just spot the pattern and say, well, from this angle, it's going to be down. So I think, that's where there certainly is going to be, advantages where you can use machine learning to spot patterns that a human won't spot. At the moment, you spot patterns. If spot patterns, report and solve is a big part of what we do once we have good data. But that's done by a graph or a spreadsheet and a person looking at it. To that,
Right.
that's that keeps happening. What's that? Yeah, machine learning will do that much better. You know, um, or it might be that people have a theory. When you're talking on a plant floor and someone's, yeah, I think this happens, and they can't quite describe it, and it's a feeling, and they don't have the data. Again, I think that's somewhere where really machine learning. So if I was working in a plant and you said to me, Mark, you have to put in some AI this year, I'd be okay. Let's look at machine learning. What problems will machine learning solve for me? Um, you know, or vision. Is there a vision system here that can really help me to I have a difficulty counting. I can't get this data from a sensor. Yeah, let's get a vision system in, and let's use a bit of processing there.
Super
Yeah,
interesting. Dave.
but I'm very
Oh,
skeptical about it. I don't know. I've said when I was in Hanover, anybody that had an AI avatar at the front of the stand, I was only there for a day, so I just didn't go to that stand. I said, right, I'm not going to that. They're going to be sales waffle, not a good demonstration of what's happening. Yeah, great
Dave.
opportunities, but an awful lot of nonsense as well.
Absolutely. I think that looking at new pieces of technology, especially coming from and working with so many companies that are very much legacy, a healthy dose of skepticism is a good thing. Yeah, I think a healthy dose of skepticism is a good thing. I think lots of the things that we're talking about here on the AI side probably we will not see implemented widespread for a number of years. But it is interesting for me to go see what people are talking about and how groups are and what groups are working on. Mark, this has been awesome. We want to go ask you the same questions we ask all of our guests, and the first one is one of my most favorite. It's predict the future, and I feel like we could go so many different ways on asking you to predict the future, and we've certainly got a lot of those forward-looking thoughts from you. But Mark, what are your thoughts on the future of either software and manufacturing or the technologies and skill sets that we're going to see, and how we get to that point into the future?
I mean, and I think we touched on an awful lot of it there. So I think perhaps on a quick take that might be a little bit contrarian is I think over the next few years we'll see a lot of software solutions or platforms fall off. Um, Either they'll be purchased and amalgamated, or they will go out of business. At the moment,
Mhm.
it is a job to just stay on top of the new technologies coming out. What new software is coming out? What does it do? Is it good for my use case? That feels like a full-time job sometimes. Um, I think it's a bit like if you go back and read about the console wars, there was loads
Mhm.
of other consoles that we've forgotten about that weren't, an Xbox, a PlayStation, or a Nintendo.
Mhm.
So Atari had them. Sega, there was a bunch of other ones. Just after the Super Nintendo, when it really exploded, and we forget about them. And I think over the next few years, um, which is why in my architectures I'm really passionate about not having a particular software solution to be the center that holds everything together. I'm very nervous about doing that because I just don't know what's going to be there in a few years.
Absolutely. I think the only thing that we know is that with the rapid changes in software, we will continue to see lots of changes. And I think that the changes will only continue. The changes will only continue and will probably surprise even us,
Yeah,
all that not many years into the future.
yeah,
Mark, if I know we've talked about kind of from the end user perspective of how to go see if your OT engineer or your controls engineer might be interested in learning some new things with SQL, which I think is interesting. And I would say, especially if they don't accidentally nuke the SQL server and just accidentally erase everything. I think giving them one of those tests would be really good. For someone who is maybe the controls engineer early to middle in their career and is looking to do their job to maybe get higher in the skill stack or to maybe try to help future proof some of their skills, what's the best career advice you can give them?
I mean, I think in a general it would be curious and be open. Now that's great advice and useless advice in the other. Um, I think a great thought experiment is say, what would I do if I was given a greenfield site? How would I solve all of my problems that drive me mad today? And you create that architecture and you blueprint it out. And once you have that done, the next question is, okay, how do I take what I have today and move it closer to that? I think sometimes we're limited by what we have, and we go, well, this is what I have, so this is only what I can do. Well, put that to the side for a minute.
Mhm.
Design your dream system, because you'll be surprised that, well, actually, I could do this and this pretty easily. And then once you've started, you get momentum and you keep going. Um, I mean, there's so much. I don't want to recommend any softwares, but I think we touched on it earlier. The technology to learn about, you know, um, start to if you really want to go and you're there, you can look at data ops. I mean, that's up a level. I think you have the VLANs, the cybersecurity, those ones. The next kind of add-on would be do you want to start to look at data ops? If you understand databases, you've got that down, you're starting to do your ETL. Well, actually, let's really get into data ops, because the data ops experts and the machine learning experts, they're great at what they do, but they don't understand manufacturing. And if you could bring the skill set of understanding the manufacturing process, I think that would really, really provide value to a data ops team, rather than having data op. You could have 3 or 4 other people, data ops people, who they understand data ops and they're better at data ops than you might be, but you've got this incredible experience that can help them, and get so much more out of them, and really drive that forward.
What I will say, if I
Absolutely.
can, Mark. Sorry, Dave. If I can add to like Mark's point, and I think we didn't really talk about this, but the cost of trying a lot of those software tools is practically zero, right? So a lot of them will offer trials. You can spin up databases. You can, you mentioned Node-RED a couple of times. Everything is very, at least from what I can tell you, is very accessible. Unlike some of the red tape you typically have on the OT side. So I think that's another plus
And
of maybe learning on that side.
I'm very involved in the unified namespace and in that Industry 4.0 Discord community. And people often will be saying, "How do I get?" And I'm like, how do I know how to do this? I'm like, just build it. Start off, download Mosquito, download Node-RED, download Grafana. Take some data. You can pull it from a PLC in Node-RED, publish it to your broker, graph it, and now you could be in a room of 1,000 people who all talk about a unified namespace, and you've done more than 90+% of them by graphing a single value into a historical store and graphing it. So there's an awful lot of people who talk about the architecture and the benefit of it, but don't actually implement it. But just get it. Try it out. I built my first one on a Raspberry Pi, that I had sitting around, and I had to ask ChatGPT how to load most of the software on, because I didn't know how to, pull down a package and how to do that. And ChatGPT gave me the command. I copied and pasted over, and away I go. Even when I started, I had to ask it for help on how to do Telnet. So yeah, and that's the other thing. If you want to lose, I mean, yeah, you can really get some help from ChatGPT. And especially on those open tools that don't have licenses that you have to pay. If you try to get help from an OT tool for Siemens programming or Rockwell, it's much harder because the manuals aren't in the model, because they're behind a login wall. And I think that is something that those manufacturer or those OEMs will have to change. They need to get there, because if you have a code assist PLC, that information is in there. So now it's easier for someone to learn, and the graduate who comes out in 2 or 3 years' time will be expecting to have all the information in that ChatGPT model.
It's going to be an interesting time. I'm curious to see how things progress for sure. But yeah, I appreciate that. Thanks, Mark.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Mark. Now, Mark, I know we were talking a little bit before, and this is what delayed us a bit, but you have an interesting book recommendation or author and seemingly hundreds of books to go recommend. But what book do you have for us?
Well, and I thought of other ones. So as I said, my favorite author, and I think he is going to be, as time goes on, people will appreciate more and more how incredible he is. Terry Pratchett, British author. I mentioned earlier, if you watch Good Omens on Prime, he wrote half of that with Neil Gaiman. He wrote there's a Christmas movie, The Hogfather. You might have catched up. That's another one of his. It's absurdist fantasy is the setting. It's set on a world that's a disc on the back of 4 elephants. That's on the back of a giant turtle flying through space. But his understanding of how people interact, how people are both petty and wonderful, is absolutely perfect. It is one of my favorite passages in literature. So I would absolutely, but I think I should recommend something a bit more maybe business focused. If you wanted to do it, it came into my head. Sorry, Edward de Bono. The author Edward de Bono, he wrote a book. He came up with the phrase lateral thinking. He has a book, how to how to think creatively. I read that. I remember reading it, going, "Oh, this guy is really, really smart." It really is. He's teaching you how to think. He has another book, Six Thinking Hats. Another book which I think is brilliant. I am right and you are wrong. And it's about the art of negotiating and the art of getting consensus. And that was the book which I mentioned about the difference between a meeting in the United States, where it's all about one idea coming out and winning, and in Japan it's all about everybody having a consensus to move on at the end of the meeting. But if Edward de Bono, um,
But it's two
absolutely
separate books, right? So okay, so
two
there's a
different
couple of
authors.
books. So
Yeah.
there's
Oh, Edward de Bono has a lot of. I mean, this is a guy. I mean, I said he created the phrase lateral thinking. That's and it's all about how to come up with different ideas and not be stuck in that sort of, if we sit down to solve a problem, we come up with an idea and then we build on it in a very linear way. That's how people's brains tend to work. And what
Mhm.
his research and his work is about, let's come up with lots of different ways that we could solve this problem, even if they're not particularly, useful at the start. And the great example is there was a meeting where they were trying to figure out how to stop snow accumulating on overhead lines in Canada, because the snow would eventually break the lines. And someone said, "Oh, what about?" And they went, "No, no, no." Didn't want to answer it. And Edward Bono, who was facilitating the meeting, "No, no, tell us, tell us." I said, "I was thinking, the way bears scratch their backs on trees." I went, "Yeah. What if we could make them scratch their backs on telegraph poles and they'd knock the snow?" And no, they don't do anything about that. But because they talked about that, they talked about how to do it. They came up with the idea of flying a helicopter down the lines. The
Mhm.
helicopter does the same vibration, and that knocks the snow off. But if they had had a meeting where you weren't empowered to come up with that crazy different alternative, you couldn't get to the next step. So
Wait, sorry, I missed the point. Why did they need to knock off the snow?
the snow can accumulate so much on a wire that the weight will snap the wire.
Oh, gotcha. Right.
It sounds crazy. It's only a bit of snow, but yeah, the weight can snap the wire. So um, definitely, if you're up for a bit of a splatters fantasy, read Terry Pratchett. He is I think the greatest underappreciated author by far. And if you really want to think how to think better, we all should want to think better. Edward de Bono.
Interesting. Those are two very, very different but interesting books. Thank you so much for that, Mark. Last question for you to end this really cool conversation is: how can our listeners help you? Who should reach out? Are you looking to go work with some people? Are you looking for new customers? What can our listeners do to help you?
New customers are always great. So if you think I can help you, please reach out. I'd love to help. Um, the ask perhaps that I might have for people, I think, and I'll keep it very brief because I know we're late on time. I think the biggest issue holding back manufacturing is,
Mhm.
if you look at system integrators, every system integrator has gone off and created their own model for a pump in a Siemens PLC, and their own model for a temperature transmitter, and their own model for this and that. In the IT world, that tends to be on GitHub, and I just go and download Vlad's pump and find, yeah, that's really good, and I change it and I improve it a bit and I load it back up, and now Vlad's using my pump model. And I think as an industry, we have to figure out how to do that, because that holds us back, in that we spend so much time as an industry doing the same thing. We can't accelerate at the same pace that the IT world has accelerated, which is why IT look at OT and go, that's 1990s level stuff, guys. And it's because we're all doing the same thing and we're all creating everything from first principles. I don't know how to move that on. I don't know whether we need to create a manufacturing GitHub. I know Ignition is doing some things and has an area for that. But I think if anybody has a good idea on how to solve that problem, I think there's only win. there's only winners that come out of that. It's not a zero-sum game. It's something that we can really benefit as an industry. I don't know how I'm going to do that, how to solve that, not yet. So if anybody wants to help me solve that problem, yeah, give me a shout. We'll
Interesting.
figure it out.
I would almost think, Mark, that it's more of a question of how do we get the 50,000 integrators and each of the different facilities to go adopt something, less than it is how do we go build it. I'd imagine much of it already exists sitting on people's individual repos, sitting on people's individual computers. I think it's more of a question of what would it take to find the mass adoption from the end users for everyone to agree this is the direction we want to go.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree, but I think there's a bit of if you build it, they will come too. If we build it and it's
Absolutely.
easier, it makes your life easier, people will use it.
I mean,
if we
look,
build it and it makes your life easier, so you're now cheaper than the competitor, yeah, they'll come too.
I will say this, right? So I've heard this request a couple of times, and I'm obviously aware that that is a problem in our industry. If we can host something, I think it will require effort and management because there's obviously needs to be someone who triages that is skilled, that understands that there's a better version that's being pushed to that repo versus, you know what I mean? So I think it's not as, I don't want to say it's a trivial solution, but I think there needs to be maybe a consensus of, let's say, if I've not worked with pumps, then who am I to judge that there's a better version of the software to manage, let's say, a pump? So I think there's, but I'm open to, I guess, like I'll throw this down to host stuff under the Solus PLC banner because I know we have a lot of people that reference us on the PLC side. But it could be, anyways. I think it's an
Yeah.
interesting idea, but someone needs to kind of govern that and manage.
Yeah, and I don't know how to solve it either. But I think as well, if you look at GitHub and you look at the way that happened, there's a lot less governance there than you might think you need as well. And it seems to work. So there's there's models of control and again, is it having stuff defederated in a defederated control system? There's ways of doing that as well. And if you think Linux has managed it, and I know that Thor's Lindveld keeps the kernel, and there's though there is some control. I think, but I agree that's the challenge. And if someone has some good ideas, I'd just love to help push that down the hill. And yeah, someone will need to drive it. Someone will need to do something else, and we'll need to figure a lot of stuff out. But I think that's really the thing that's holding back. I think that's why when IT look at OT, they go, yeah, okay, they're Stone Age guys. And I want to change that. That's what I really want to change. I want the IT people to go, wow, that's really cool stuff they're doing in OT. Because it is.
Interesting.
That's a good idea. Go ahead, Dave.
I think that's interesting, and that is certainly a conversation that we should continue. We do want to thank everyone for coming and hanging out with us, for Mark, for being here. If you guys are not connected to Mark, make sure that you go connect with Mark. Go have some of these fun, interesting conversations. Maybe you guys can figure out how we can convince everyone to both put together the same GitHub repo or Git repo, and then also use the repo on the OT side, and then go ahead and send us some messages because I think that would be interesting. If you're not connected to Manufacturing Hub and following Vlad and myself, please go ahead and do so. If you guys have made it all this far on podcast form, you are awesome. Thank you so much. Please do the things that are important, like and comment and share and rate us 5 stars. Yes, when I ask you guys to do those things and we get the new podcast published, you guys listen to it more, which just is this amazing linear progression of more and more folks listening to Manufacturing Hub, which is pretty awesome. Until next week, we'll see everyone.